Chapter 3 Pillars of Islam. In this section, we will discuss the foundations of Islam, which are built upon the 5 pillars each Muslim is obligated to practice. The 5 pillars are as follows: Shahada, or Declaration of Faith; 2. 5 daily prayers, Salah; 3. Fasting in the month of Ramadan; 4. Tithing, or Zakat, totaling 2.5% of savings; or 5. Hajj, or pilgrimage to Mecca. Let us now examine each one of the pillars in greater detail, starting with the first. Pillar 1. Shahada, Declaration of Faith. For your God is one God. There is no deity besides the benevolent and merciful. Surah 2:163. The Shahada, which means witness in Arabic, is the first and most important pillar in that it requires the individual to recognize and believe that there is no God but God and Prophet Muhammad is the messenger of God. By this declaration, a person has entered Islam, thereby becoming a Muslim. A myriad of books have been written which discuss Prophet Muhammad. For example, Martin Ling's Author of Muhammad, His Life Based on the Earliest Sources, is an excellent text with which to study the life of the Prophet. However, for our purposes, let us focus our attention on a brief overview of the Muslim conceptualization of God. Just as a note, Allah is the name of God, as is Jehovah or Yahweh in the Old Testament. Allah is not a pronoun, in my opinion, should not be translated as a general term for God. More important is the effort by some Christians and Jews to claim that Jehovah is the Hebrew name of God, but Allah and Jehovah are not one and the same. This dispute, promulgated by ignorant Christian scholars, reminds me of the similar effort of Marcion and his followers. Marcion, a 2nd century priest, taught his Christian followers that the God of the Old Testament is not the God of the New Testament. They believed that the God of the Jews and the Old Testament was an angry, jealous, and hateful God. But the God of the Christians in the New Testament was a kind, loving, and merciful God. Gonzalez, 1984. This specious proposition must have been confusing to the early Jews, given that Jesus Christ was Jewish and sent to preach to the Jews in their synagogues. Marcion may have believed this distance from the Jewish faith would be socially and politically advantageous, because they were perceived as rebels within the Roman Empire after their failed attempt at reclaiming Jerusalem in 65 AD. It seems as though Marcion did to the Jews what Christians are doing to the Muslims. Some preachers are promulgating a similar message post 9/11, distancing the God of Christians from the God of Muslims. However, today we would laugh at Marcion for such a decree, and I hope that after reading the next section you'll do the same. To add to the confusion, some Christians have promulgated the belief that Allah was the pagan god the Arabs worshipped. Prior to Prophet Muhammad, the worship of the one God has been lost by the descendants of Ishmael. The Arabs, like sons of Jacob, had at one point in their history begun to worship idols. They had over 360 idols housed in the Kaaba, which was built by Abraham and Ishmael. What is interesting about the 360 idols is that the Arabs contended that Allah was the invisible God, creator of the universe, and above all others. They were correct in their belief in Allah, but they had lost sight of His oneness, which had been reintroduced by Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad was against any form of idol worship. In fact, the first moment he entered into the Kaaba, having won Mecca without a battle, he destroyed all 360 idols. Moreover, some Christians claim that Allah is the moon god, because of the symbolism of the moon and stars on the flag of some Muslim countries. This, too, is erroneous. There are numerous verses in the Quran that reveal the purpose of why the moon was created. It is used as a calendar and is a beautiful torch to guide travelers. In Surah 10, verse 5, it states, "It is God who has made the sun shine and the moon glow, and determined lunar phases that you may know the number of the years in the calculation. God did not create that in any way but right. God makes these signs clear to people who discern." That being said, let me return to answering the more important question. How do Muslims conceptualize the one and almighty God, Allah? There are many scholars who have written on this topic, but the one I find to be the most concise and comprehensive is the 12th century scholar Imam Ghazali. Below follows an excerpt from his text, The Revival of the Religious Sciences. God, in his essence, is one, without any partner, single without any similar, internal without any opposite, separate without any like. He is one, prior with nothing before him, from eternity, without any beginning, abiding in existence with none after him, in eternity, without any end, subsisting without ending, abiding without termination. He hath not ceased, and he will not cease to be described with glorious epithets. He is the first and last, the external and internal, and he knows everything. He witnessed that he is not a body possessing bounds and limits. He does not resemble bodies either in limitation or in accepting division. He is not a substance. No entity resembles him, nothing is like him, and he is not like anything. Measure does not limit him, and boundaries do not contain him. The directions do not surround him, and neither the earth nor the heavens are on different sides of him. There is not in essence his equal, nor in his equal his essence. He is far removed from change, or state, or of place. Events have no place in him, and mishaps do not befall him. Nay, he does not cease through his glorious qualities to be far removed from changing, and through his perfect qualities to be independent of perfecting increase. We witness that he is living, powerful, and commanding. Inadequacy and weakness befall him not. He is the Lord of the worlds, the visible world and the invisible, that of force and that of might. He possesses rule, creation, and the command. He created the creatures and their works, and decreed their sustenance and their terms of life. He witnessed that he knows all the things that can be known, comprehending that which happened from the bounds of the earth unto the highest heavens. No grain in the earth or in the heavens is distant from his knowledge, yes. He knows the creeping of the light, and upon the rugged rock in a dark night he perceived the movement of the mote in the midst of the air. He knows the secret and the concealed, and has knowledge of the suggestions of the minds and the movement of the thoughts and the concealed things of the inmost parts, by a knowledge which is prior from eternity. We witness that he is the willer of the things that are, and the things that happen. There does not come about in the world, seen or unseen, little or much, small or great, good or evil, advantage or disadvantage, faith or unbelief, knowledge or ignorance, success or loss, increase or diminution, obedience or rebellion, except by his will. What he wills happens. What he doesn't will doesn't happen. Not a glance of one who looks or a slip of one who thinks is outside his will. He is the creator, the resurrector, the doer of that which he wills. And we witness that he is the all-hearing, the all-seeing, and no audible thing is distant from his hearing, and no visible thing is as far from his seeing. However fine it may be, distance does not curtain off his hearing, and darkness does not dull his seeing. And we witness that he speaks, commands, forbids, praises, as well as threatens with a speech that is subsisting in his essence from all eternity, not resembling the speech of created things. He is living, knowing, powerful, willer, hearer, seer, as well as speaker through life, power, knowledge, will, hearing, seeing, speech. None of these are separated from his essence. Second pillar, Salah, 5 daily prayers. And seek help by patience and prayer, though that is formidable but for the humble. Surah 2:45. The second pillar of Islam is the 5 daily prayers, called Salah. It is required by every Muslim from the time of puberty. The prayers, Salah, are spread throughout the days as a reminder to Muslims for the true purpose in life, which is the obedience and worship of God. The first prayer, called Fajr, is performed at dawn an hour or so before sunrise. The second prayer, Duhr, is done in the afternoon shortly after the sun reaches its zenith. The third prayer, Asr, is performed in the mid-afternoon around 1.5 hours before sunset. The fourth prayer, called Maghrib, is performed immediately after sunset. The fifth prayer, Isha, is performed at night. These are the fixed times that Muslims throughout the world follow. Fortunately, in Muslim countries and in places with a large Muslim population, there is a designated person, known as the muezzin, who calls the Muslims to prayer. This is similar to the Christian usage of bells and the Jewish horn to signify the time of worship. Since the Quran was revealed in Arabic, and the Salah is a recitation of the Quran, it is necessary for Muslims to learn and read Arabic, as well as memorize portions of the Quran. This requirement of memorizing the Quran is a great blessing for Muslims, in that it means by which the Quran is preserved. It has been over 1400 years since the Quran was revealed to Prophet Muhammad, and to this day the Quran maintains its authenticity without any corruption. Despite it containing 114 chapters and over 6,236 verses, there are millions of Muslims who have memorized the entire Quran in its original Arabic text. Some children as young as 6 years old have completed this monumental task despite the fact that Arabic may not be their native language. Muslims believe that this is proof of the Quran's status as a divine work, as it resides in the hearts of people. This example of complete memorization of Scripture in its original text is not replicated by any other religion or its respective Scripture. The prayers themselves are very short and simple. They usually take 5 to 10 minutes. However, before the prayer is made, there is a ritual washing, ablution, of the hands, mouth, face, arms, and feet, called wudu. This is done so that when an individual is in the presence of God and worshipping Him, they are physically pure. It should be noted that cleanliness is a part of all faiths, especially the Abrahamic religions. Like Muslims, the Jews had an extensive tradition of physical purity and cleanliness. Moreover, the Christians had an area built inside the cathedrals for ritual washing before they entered the main worship area. After the ritual washing is performed, Muslims are ready to stand before God and offer salah, prayer. Now let me highlight a few points regarding these prayers. An important aspect of the prayers is humbling oneself by prostrating before the Creator. This gesture, placing one's face to the ground, as well as documented in previous scriptures. This was done by Abraham in Genesis 17:3. Abraham fell on his face and God talked with him. By Moses in Numbers 14:5. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces in the presence of all the assembly of the congregation of the sons of Israel. And by Jesus in Matthew 26:39. And he went a little beyond them and fell on his face and prayed. Muslims have also been taught by Prophet Muhammad to prostrate within the prayer because the servant is closest to God while prostrating. Another significant aspect of the prayer that may be interesting to Christians appears at the end of the prayer. At the end of each prayer, Muslims recite, O God, bless Muhammad and the people of Muhammad, as you have blessed Abraham and the people of Abraham. Surely you are praiseworthy, the glorious. O God, be gracious unto Muhammad and the people of Muhammad, as you were gracious unto Abraham and the people of Abraham. Surely you are praiseworthy, the glorious. Moreover, there are numerous prayers in which Muslims send their blessings and peace upon Abraham and all the prophets. Such prayers demonstrate that Islam is the religion that affirms the earlier prophets and embraces their traditions. For this reason, God has blessed Muslims and He promised to do in Genesis. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. Genesis 12:3. Outside of the 5 daily prayers, there is a special prayer each Friday. The Friday prayer, known as the Jummah prayer, is especially significant because it is done in large congregations. Muslims are required to make this prayer in their local mosque, which is the Muslim place of worship, comparable to a church or synagogue. Congregational prayer is important as it creates a sense of community and forms stronger bonds between fellow Muslims. The prayer itself includes a short 10-15 minute sermon led by an imam, the spiritual leader of the mosque. After the sermon, the imam leads the congregation in a short prayer. The entire event spans no more than 30 minutes. Upon completion, Muslims are encouraged to be social with one another, but are otherwise free to resume their daily routine, unlike the Jewish and Catholic traditions, which impose restrictions against working and other remedial tasks during the Sabbath. Friday is a holy day, but there is no undue prohibitions attached to it. After the Friday prayer, Muslims go about their business like any other day. Friday was chosen as the holy day because it was on Friday, the 6th day, that Prophet Adam was created, and to honor his memory, Muslims celebrate Friday as the holy day, since we are descendants of Adam. Let me briefly mention the setup of the prayers in mosques. There's an imam at the front of the congregation, followed by the men, and then the women. This construction is not based upon the superiority of men over women, as presumed by non-Muslims, but the genders are segregated so that there is no temptation that can interfere in the worship. It is exclusively for this reason that Islam segregates the genders and encourages certain boundaries between them. It sounds very primitive, but it is very effective, and problems that arise when there is free and open interaction between the sexes are not found in the Muslim world, such as the preteen, teen, premarital sex, adultery, children born out of wedlock, and rape. For this reason, there are strict guidelines in place regarding the attire of both men and women. The Quran states, in 24:30, Say to the believing men that they should lower their gaze and guard their modesty. That will make for greater purity for them, and God is well acquainted with all that they do. In this verse, God addresses the men first and orders them to lower their gaze and not seek out temptation. In the subsequent verse, God addresses the women. And say to the believing women that they should lower their gaze and guard their modesty, that they should not display their beauty and ornaments except what must ordinarily appear thereof, and they should draw their veil over their bosoms and not display their beauty. Surah 24:31. This verse has been interpreted as requiring Muslim women to cover their adornments, including the hair, but not the face. The niqab, or face veil, is a conservative interpretation by scholars, though the majority do not require it, and its use is not widespread in the Muslim world. Along with the head covering, they should dress in loose clothing so as not to reveal their figures or invite salacious thoughts towards them by onlookers. The head covering is meant as a protection from sin. As stated in Mark 9:47, Jesus Christ cautions against temptations of the eye that lead to sin. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than have 2 eyes and be thrown into hell. Hence, both for men and women, the veil facilitates harmonious social order. Although, from a Western perspective, the head covering is a sign of women's subjugation by men, this notion is frankly nonsense. This is evident by the conversion of women in the West, who choose to wear the head covering to adhere to the teaching of the Quran. Some of these women are modern, educated, and working women who are not in any way dominated by men. They are simply following the Abrahamic traditions. In the New Testament, the following statement is made by St. Paul. If a woman does not cover her head, she should have her hair cut off. And if it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut off or shaved off, she should cover her head. 1 Corinthians 11. Again, the head covering is a sign of humility and conceals the beauty of the woman from onlookers and protects her from ill thoughts. The hijab that a Muslim woman wears is no different than what a nun wears, and one ordinarily should not have any ill thoughts when they see a nun in her habit. It is in keeping with Jewish and early Christian traditions and has been adopted by Muslims for both their prayers and daily lives. Third pillar, fasting in the month of Ramadan. O believers, fasting is prescribed for you, as it was prescribed for those before you, and that you may be conscientious. Surah 2, 183. The third pillar of Islam is fasting in the month of Ramadan, which every Muslim who has reached puberty is required to partake in. Ramadan is the 9th month in the Muslim calendar and contains the day which the Quran was first revealed to Prophet Muhammad. Before we begin our discussion about fasting, I think it would be appropriate to mention at this time a few things about the Quran. The Quran is not the word of Prophet Muhammad, but the word of God brought by Angel Gabriel. Prophet Muhammad's companions were able to differentiate the Quranic text from the sayings of the Prophet, known as the Hadiths. Thus, when people unfamiliar with the Islamic faith say that the Quran is the word of Prophet Muhammad, they are mistaken. No Muslim believes that the Quran is the word of the Prophet, as he was unable to read or write. Prophet Muhammad received God's revelation, the Quran, just as all prophets received revelation, including Moses, the recipient of the Torah, David, the recipient of the Zabur, the Psalms, and Jesus, the recipient of the Injil, the Gospel. The Quran does not follow a chronological pattern, so that the early revelations of the Quran do not necessarily appear in the beginning of the book. The text is laid out exactly how Angel Gabriel instructed Prophet Muhammad. However, we know precisely when and where each surah was revealed, and under what circumstances, so that the Quran can be written chronologically. The Quran was preserved by numerous companions of Prophet Muhammad who had it put to memory but also committed it to writing. However, that which was written had not been put into a book form. Rather, the entire transcript of the Quran was loosely assembled. Not only was there a scarcity in ink and paper, there were even fewer people who knew how to read or write. Like Prophet Muhammad, the majority of Arabs did not learn to read or write, simply because it was not seen as necessary for survival. As such, the oral tradition was the most common means of preserving knowledge. For those few who were capable of reading and writing, Prophet Muhammad assigned them the task of transcribing the Quran as it was being revealed. Furthermore, in each Ramadan, Angel Gabriel would hear the Prophet reciting the Quran as a review. In fact, during the Prophet's last Ramadan, Angel Gabriel heard him recite the Quran twice in its entirety. Thus, when it came to putting the Quran into book form, the companions of the Prophet utilized both the written and oral testimony, as there were many followers who had committed the Quran to memory. This should not seem unusual, as in Jeremiah 31:33, God has promised that law is to be preserved in the minds and hearts of the Jewish people. But this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and on their heart I will write it, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. However, Muslims have demonstrated that God's promise can be fulfilled, as they preserve the Quran in its entirety in their hearts and minds. Hence, if the written record of the Quran is altered or lost, there are millions of Muslims who can reproduce it in its original Arabic text. What is more remarkable about the Prophet's first revelation by the angel Gabriel is that it is quite similar to what is found in Isaiah 29:12. Then the book will be given to the one who is illiterate, saying, "Please read this," and he will say, "I cannot read." Prophet Muhammad was illiterate. His entire life he never learned to read or write. While praying one day in a cave of Hira, the angel Gabriel appeared to the Prophet suddenly and ordered him to Iqra, read, write, recite, repeat, proclaim. Prophet Muhammad in his terror thought he was being asked to read, so he stammered, "I am unlettered." The angel Gabriel again ordered him to Iqra, and again he replied, "I am unlettered." The angel Gabriel now took a firm hold of him and commanded him, "Iqra in the name of God who created." Now Prophet Muhammad began to understand that he was not being asked to read, but to recite or repeat. He began to repeat after him, and Gabriel revealed to him the first verses of the Quran, those at the beginning of the Surah Al-Alaq. Proclaim or read in the name of thy Lord and Cherisher, who created man out of a mere clot of congealed blood. Proclaim, and thy Lord is most beautiful. He taught the use of the pen, taught man that which he knew not. Surah 96, 1-5. Moreover, the Quran can only be truly understood if one uses the Hadiths and the commentary which clarifies when, where, and under what circumstances those particular passages were revealed. Therefore, if one only merely read the translation of the Quran, the reader would not acquire the full meaning of the passages. Additionally, the reader would not know why a particular surah or passage was revealed, or whether it has been omitted or abrogated. For example, those passages that asked the Muslims to kill all infidels or non-believers were revealed during wartime for specific battles and historical events. Hence, Muslims do not implement such verses after a particular passing of the battle or event. We know this to be true because within the Muslim world, a collection of nearly 60 countries, we find Christians, Jews, Buddhists, and atheists living amongst Muslims. Another and a more appropriate example, given the topic of fasting, is that there were 2 separate times in which fasting was commanded by God, both passages appearing in the same surah. The first verse that asks Muslims to fast is found in Surah 2, verses 183 through 184. It states, "O believers, fasting is prescribed for you, as it is prescribed for those before you, that you may be conscientious. And a ransom is incumbent upon those who are able, the feeding of the pauper. But if anyone willing does even better, then that is better for him. It is better for you to fast, if you only knew. An individual chooses not to fast, they in turn must replace the fast by feeding the poor." This provision was rescinded and cancelled by verse 185, which was revealed a year later. This verse states, "The month of Ramadan is the one in which the Quran was revealed, as guidance for humility and demonstrations in the way of guidance and discrimination. So whoever among you is present that month should fast. If anyone is ill or on a journey, then the prescribed term is to be from other days. God wishes to ease for you, not hardship, and that you fulfill the prescribed terms, and that you celebrate God for guiding you, and that you may be grateful. Hence all Muslims are required, without due exception, to fast during Ramadan." As stated in verse 183, fasting was required by earlier traditions. We know that within the Abrahamic traditions, both Jews and Christians were mandated to fast. The fasts of Muslims and Jews were distinctly different from the fasts of Christians. For example, the Christian fasting is loosely interpreted to allow for some eating and drinking throughout the day. The individual can fast from a specific indulgence to meet the criterion for fasting. Moreover, Protestants do not have one standard for days, times, or methods of fasting. While on the other hand, Christians in the Catholic and Orthodox churches have the doctrine of fasting during Lent. Although Muslims are required to fast during the month of Ramadan, the Jews fast during specific holy days. Both Muslims and Jews fast approximately 1 hour before sunrise to sunset, without any consumption of liquids or solids, such as was the practice of the prophets. Prophet Moses fasted for 40 days according to Deuteronomy 9:9. "When I went up to the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant which the Lord had made with you, then I remained on the mountain 40 days and nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water." Jesus Christ fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, which is demonstrated by Matthew 4:2. After he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he then became hungry. In both cases, neither Prophet Moses nor Prophet Jesus ate or drank anything. This is the fast that is followed by the Muslims, just as it was taught by the Prophet Muhammad. The intended goal of fasting is spiritual uplifting, so that the one can bring themselves closer to God. Abstaining from food and physical intimacy is but a small part of fasting. Those are just the basic principles of the fast. The larger principle is total awareness and submission to God. This will enable the spirit to be cleansed from the sins that have accumulated in the past year and replace them with the good that one is expected to do. Within this holy month, Muslims should increase their good works. Muslims are taught to be mindful of the unfortunate members of society. This includes the poor, the widowed, the sick, as well as orphans. During Ramadan, Muslims are asked to increase their gifts to these groups. In other words, to be a good citizen, spread peace and joy amongst the people, and do not neglect your obligations to the larger community. We are individuals with a larger context, whether as a nuclear family, extended family, or neighborhood. We are responsible for the well-being of the greater human population. At the same time, the fast is also an opportunity for humbling ourselves before God and submitting to Him the suppressing natural desires in order to please God. It is through His pleasure that one can hope to obtain a deeper spiritual relationship with God, leading to the ultimate contentedness. Becoming closer to God with faith and good deeds is resulting the fasting produces. It is intended to recharge the spirit, to strive for goodness, and achieve spirituality. After the first fast is completed, Muslims celebrate the end of Ramadan with a celebration called Eid al-Fitr, which is a large congregational prayer. Pillar 4. Zakat. Tithing. Do not worship anything but God, and be good to parents, relatives, orphans, and the poor, and speak nicely to people, and pray regularly, and give alms. Surah 2:83. Zakat, charity, is the Islamic equivalent of the Christian and Jewish notion of tithing as the third pillar of the Islamic faith. It literally comes from the root word tazkiyah, which means to purify or cleanse. The additional meaning of tazkiyah is to multiply. As such, zakat is the act of giving in charity that leads to the purification of our money. And this altruism of giving to others does not contribute to its diminution, but to its increase. Islam comes from the perspective that all of our possessions, our wealth, our families, and even our bodies, are a trust from God that must be deployed in such a way that pleases Him. This principle of self-sacrifice to attain God's pleasure is a central theme that resonates throughout the Quran. By giving in charity to the needy, we as humans remain grounded to our true purpose of service to others. The act of hoarding and accumulation leads to selfishness, and this inclines the individual to think that his wealth is his birthright and will be with him forever. The act of hoarding and accumulation leads to selfishness, and this inclines the individual to think that his wealth is his birthright and he will be with him forever. The kindly act of giving balances the individual and protects him or her from selfishness and greed. The recipient is aided by the gesture, and goodwill is fostered between parties. Zakat is also an opportunity to express gratitude to God for the bounty and comfort that He has bestowed. Zakat is paid yearly, and is required of all Muslims on their savings. As such, the payment of zakat is not obligatory to one's property, but on the excess savings, which are calculated by deducting all debts and expenses. It is 2.5% or 1/40th of one's savings. The Quran specifies in the clearest of terms to whom this charity can be given. The Quran states, "Zakat is for the poor and the needy, and those employed to manage the funds, for those whose hearts are reconciled to the truth, for manumitting a slave, and for the freedom of captives and those in debt, and for fighters in the cause of God, and for the wayfarer. Is so ordered by God, and God is all-knowing, all-wise." Surah 960. The verse stipulates the various categories of the poor and the manner in which zakat is to be used. It cannot be given to an institution, and unlike giving tithing to churches, zakat cannot be given to mosques or Islamic centers. It can only be given to the poor and the needy of a community. The wisdom behind this is that institutions use a portion of their money for the upkeep and management of their organization. Phrased plainly, they have certain fixed costs and fixed expenses. A mosque, for instance, has to pay for its light bill, heating and water expenses, etc. As such, expenditure of money does not alleviate the plight of the poor and the destitute. In order to directly assist the disenfranchised members of a community, zakat can only be given to the categories mentioned above. Voluntary charity, or sadaqah, can be given to mosques, churches, humanitarian relief organizations, and so forth. This term, sadaqah, which is loosely translated as voluntary charity, has a holistic meaning in Islam. It refers to any charitable act that helps others in some way. In a famous quote narrated by Abu Dhar, below, the Prophet Muhammad captured his comprehensive understanding of charity. Some of the companions of the Messenger of God said, "O Messenger of God, the affluent have made off with the rewards. They pray as we pray, they fast as we fast, and they give away in charity the superfluity of their wealth." He said, "Has not God made things for you to give away in charity? Truly every act of glorifying God is a charity. To recognize and proclaim that God is the greatest is a charity. Every utterance praising God is a charity, and the testimony that there is only one God is a charity. To enjoin good action is a charity, and to forbid any evil action is a charity, and the sexual act of each of you there is a charity." They said, "O Messenger of God, when one of us fulfills his sexual desire, will he have some reward for that?" He said, "Do you not think that were he to act upon it unlawfully, he would be sinning? Likewise, if he has acted upon it lawfully, he will have a reward." Muslim. In this text, it is clear that charity has been conceptualized in a comprehensive manner. Since no man is an island, he or she has to constantly interact with other beings. Thus, charity is not narrowly defined in terms of giving money to people. Instead, every act of enjoining good, every act of prohibiting evil, and every kind gesture is considered to be charity. Such acts enable us to fulfill our obligations to others and contribute to the enrichment of social relationships. This is analogous to the prophetic teaching of Jesus Christ when he said, "What you do to the least of my brothers, you do to me." Here, any harm inflicted on the weakest and disenfranchised members of the community is considered to be an attack on Jesus himself. Likewise, any act of goodwill towards others is divinely sanctified and fulfills our moral imperative as human beings. Money is not the only means by which one can tithe. Words and deeds are also instrumental. As with anything, Islam enjoins moderation. Concerning giving alms, the Quran prescribes the servant to be fair and not gravitate to extremes. The Quran states, "And do not make your hand tied to your neck, like a miser, nor extend it to the utmost that you have become worthy of blame and pennilessness." This verse teaches that we should not be so stingy that our hands are tied behind our necks. At the same time, we should not extend our hands outward in such a way that relinquishes all of our possessions. Between the two extremes of extravagance and miserlessness is a moderate path that helps the recipient yet protects the rights of the giver. Of course, the ultimate goal is to create a social order on earth that is rooted in justice and does not lead to the hoarding of wealth by a few. In this regard, the Quran states what God has granted as booty to his messengers belongs to God, to his messenger and to the relatives and the orphans, the needy and the wayfarer, in order that it may not be circulated between the wealthy among you. It is estimated that there are over 1 billion people on earth who are overweight. Simultaneously, there are over 800 million people worldwide who are starving and living in extreme poverty. How can these two contradictions coexist? The reality is that there isn't a shortage of food and resources in the world, but rather a lack of kindness and empathy towards others. Humans need to internalize the sentiment of social empathy, and this is what Zakat seeks to cultivate. One final thought with regards to tithing is that individuals must not be persuaded by preachers who obtain enormous amounts of wealth from their parishioners. Any tithing is intended for the poor and the indigent of society, not to support the extravagant lifestyles of preachers. It is troubling to see well-intended and kind parishioners giving their hard-earned money to televangelists, who then become rich. A great example of abusive fundraising conducted by televangelists is Oral Roberts, who blackmailed supporters in giving in excess of $8 million over several months. Robert claims that if this goal was not met, God would call him up, Posner 49. This is an extremely offensive use of religion, God, and the church. Indeed, this accusation can be extended to many other church leaders, such as Rod Parsley, Pat Robertson, and John Hagee. A quintessential example of the opulence displayed by these preachers is Rod Parsley, who lives in a 7,500 square foot home that is worth over $1 million and flies in a private jet that was provided at his church's expense, Posner 2. Also, John Hagee received $800,000 in compensation for his services from his nonprofit organization and his church in 2004, Posner 4. Islam holds these people accountable for their lifestyles, and giving to them would be considered sinful, as it contributes to their sinful accumulation of wealth, opulent lifestyles, and their profitable marketing of religion. Pillar 5. Hajj, pilgrimage to Mecca. In it are signs manifest, for example, the station of Abraham. Whoever enters it attains security. Pilgrimage thereto is a duty men owe to God, those who can afford the journey, but if any deny faith, God stands not in need of any of his creatures. Surah 3:97. The fifth and final pillar of Islam is the Hajj or pilgrimage to Mecca. Muslims are required to perform the Hajj at least once in their lifetimes if they are not capable physically and financially of doing so. Hence, every year, 2.5 to 3 million Muslims congregate to Mecca on the 12th month of each year, called Dhul Hijjah. The pilgrimage predates Prophet Muhammad, going far back to the time of prophets of Abraham and Ishmael. If you recall the biblical narrative discussed in chapter 1, Sarah and the birth of Isaac told Abraham to drive out this maid Hagar and her son Ishmael, at which point Abraham took both Hagar and Ishmael to the land of the east. However, the Muslims believe that this is a negative portrayal of both Hagar and Ishmael, suggesting that they're not good company for Isaac. Muslims believe when Ishmael was a child, God commanded Abraham to take Hagar into what is now Mecca. In Genesis 21:19, it is stated that when Hagar opened her eyes, she saw a well of water, and when she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad a drink. These two people became the first inhabitants of a desolate land surrounded by hills. It was through Hagar and through Ishmael that nomadic people began to settle around this new source of water in the vast desert. These people later became the Arabs. The pilgrimage to Mecca is significant because it became the holy city when Abraham and Ishmael built the Kaaba. Since both Abraham and Ishmael entered into the covenant of worshipping the one God, they constructed the first house of worship called the Kaaba. The word Kaaba means cube. It is a small black structure. Muslim scholars believe that the Kaaba was rebuilt on the foundation that had been set by Adam, but was buried during Noah's flood. It was Abraham and Ishmael that reconstructed upon its original foundation. However, as documented in the Quran as well as the Bible, since the Kaaba was built, it has been a holy place of worship and a site of pilgrimage. There is a reference in the Psalms of David that refers to the pilgrimage to Mecca. In Psalm 84:5-6, David states, "How blessed is the man whose strength is in you, in whose heart are the highways to Zion. Passing through the valley of Baca, they make it a spring." The word Baca is another name given to Mecca depending on the dialect. The Quran also refers to Mecca as Baca in Surah 3:96. The verse states, "The first house of worship appointed for men was at Baca." They are rich written and oral traditions that have given importance to the Kaaba and made the city of Mecca holy. Hence, Muslims must make a pilgrimage to Mecca and reenact those traditions passed on from Abraham through subsequent generations and continued by Prophet Muhammad. Thus, for more than 1400 years, Muslims from all over the world gathered during the 12th month, Dhul Hijjah, and act out the various traditions and rituals, which usually take approximately 10 days. When the individual puts on the traditional two-piece white garment known as the ihram, the pilgrimage starts. There is no traditional garment requirement for women. The ihram has to be 2 unstitched pieces of clothing. It is worn during Hajj to signify the equality of all peoples, and that no one is wearing an ihram can determine whether anyone is a king, servant, or of the lower or upper classes. This traditional garment is believed to be worn by Abraham, and as such, Muslims have adopted it for the pilgrimage. The ihram also symbolizes the burial garment worn at the time of death. It is a reminder to the pilgrims of the certainty of death, inevitability of our resurrection, and accountability before God. Hence, the realization that our lives on earth are ephemeral, and the true existence is the hereafter becomes crystallized. There's a realization that Muslim people are the one people sharing one experience and no one is greater or superior to any other. Therefore, there is a strong emphasis on seeking forgiveness for one's sins and humbling oneself before God. As the ihram is worn, anger, fighting, or taking of any life is prohibited, even if the life belongs to an animal or plant. Life is sacred in and around the Kaaba at all times, and this is especially the case during the month of Hajj. The Hajj is a series of rituals and traditions that signify a particular event. I will discuss two such events that are part of the Abrahamic and Ishmaelite traditions. As mentioned earlier, Abraham relocated Hagar and son Ishmael. He then constructed the Kaaba and encircled it 7 times. Thus, every pilgrim during the Hajj must circle the Kaaba 7 times in Abraham's memory. It is only done, to my knowledge, out of respect to Abraham and the Kaaba. Another important tradition is the sacrifice of a sheep or ram, which occurs at the end of the Hajj. This sacrifice is in remembrance of Abraham's story in which God instructed him to sacrifice his son. Both the Christian and Muslim narratives, God replaced his son with a sheep. However, Christians and Jews believe that the son that Abraham was supposed to sacrifice was Isaac. This was supported in Genesis 22:2. He said, "Take now your son, your only son, who you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you." If you examine this verse very closely, it says, "your only son, Isaac." However, Isaac was not his only son. Abraham had Ishmael 14 years before Isaac's birth. Both Christians and Jews argue that Isaac was the son born to Sarah, Abraham's wife, and as such is Abraham's only son. However, that does not mean that Abraham had only one son. Moreover, there is nowhere in the Bible that says Ishmael and Madian were not Abraham's sons. To say that Ishmael and Madian were lesser sons of Abraham because they were not born to Sarah is an obvious inconsistency. The truth, Muslims believe, is that it was Ishmael who was supposed to be sacrificed by Abraham. Neither the Jews nor the Christians remember or honor the sacrifice of Abraham. Even before Islam, the Arabs had honored and respected the sacrifice of Ishmael, and during the pilgrimage, Muslims sacrificed an animal in the memory of that historical event. Of course, Prophet Muhammad, being a prophet and descendant of Abraham and Ishmael, kept his sacrifice and tradition. The Quran and Hadith, the sayings of Prophet Muhammad, are rich with details regarding this particular historic event. In Surah 37, verses 102 through 109, we read, "Then, when he had come of age to work together, he said, 'My son, I see in a dream that I sacrifice you. Now let's see what you think.' He said, 'Father, do what you are commanded. You will find me, God willing, bearing it calmly.' Then, when both had acquiesced and he lay him down on his forehead, we called to him, 'Abraham, you have already authenticated the vision, for that is how we recompose those who do right. For this is certainly an evident trial, and as we redeemed him through a tremendous sacrifice, and we left him for in future generations, peace upon Abraham.'" Through this verse, we learn that Abraham had a dream in which he was sacrificing Ishmael as a test from God of his faith and obedience. Before we get to the response of Ishmael, some may think it rather absurd for one to sacrifice his or her son based on a dream. However, Muslims believe that dreams are also a source of revelation to prophets. In the case of any prophet, their greater cause is the service and obedience to God. All prophets go through tests and tribulations, and each and every prophet has increased their faith and status as a result of it. No prophet of God has, as a result of such tests, disobeyed God and became unfaithful. Of course, some tests are greater than others. In the case of Abraham, he had one of the greatest tests from God, in which he had to sacrifice Ishmael. Moreover, one should not overlook the magnitude of the faith and obedience of Ishmael when he said, "Father, do what you are commanded, you will find me, God willing, bearing it calmly." This verse demonstrates the great love and devotion that he had for his father and tremendous faith and obediences that Ishmael had towards Almighty God. It is for this reason that both Abraham and Ishmael are paradigms of faith and obedience. One final point regarding Abraham and Ishmael relates to the prayer that they made while building the Kaaba. In Surah 2:126 we read, "And Abraham said, 'My Lord, make this a secure city, and feed its people with fruits, whoever of them believe in God in the last day.'" It is interesting that as Abraham and Ishmael were building the Kaaba, the Quran records one of Abraham's prayers. What is remarkable about this verse is that Mecca and where the Kaaba was built was a complete desert wilderness. There was no life for hundreds of miles. It is quite remarkable how fast that area became the center of commerce in the Arab Peninsula, and a place where people also congregated. In fact, the word Mecca is now synonymous with the center. Moreover, Abraham's prayer included that Mecca would become a place of abundance in order to sustain a prosperous community whose inhabitants would be able to worship in peace and live off the land. This too seems to have been realized, as the region is rich with oil, gold, and other valuable minerals. In closing, there are many more rituals and traditions of Abraham that are passed down that are a part of the Hajj that Muslims perform. There are numerous books that discuss the rituals of the Hajj extensively. The purpose of this chapter is to examine how the 5 pillars of Islam correspond with their Abrahamic traditions. Part 2 will carefully analyze the Quranic passages concerning Jesus Christ.